Okay, here we go. This accompanies a video from YouTube that I uploaded for you to watch. It's about half an hour long with some questions that go along with it. So this is the accompanying write it down period that goes with the video about the Mongols, some of the most influential people. I've talked about the Mongols since day one. I told you, if you recall, remember what I said about the Mongols? They are the world's greatest nomads. Remember that? I compared them. We talked about the Vikings and the nomads at the beginning of this course. They always attack south. Remember that? So the Mongols are the greatest nomads of history. Okay, here we go. So, the nomadic tribe of Asia, the great nomads of Asia. Look, the modern country of Mongolia is the place where the descendants of the Mongols live today. Okay, how's that sound? Okay, so Mongolia is right in there between northern Russia, Siberia, and China. All right, so those are the types of people that the Mongols and the modern Mongolians deal with today. All right, why were the Mongols nomadic? Well, as you recall, two things. Number one, they are very far north on the globe. Okay, it's cold. It's cold all the time. And then on top of that, it is actually quite a high elevation. So because of these two things, high elevation and northern latitudes, they don't have agriculture. You may be familiar with the term permafrost. Permafrost means that the ground is permanently frozen years around. So things cannot grow there, even in the summer sometimes. What type of plants are going to grow in this kind of environment? We call this area the steppes of Asia, the great steppes. So the steppes are like the plains of North America, for example, Nebraska, Kansas, states like that. We call that the plains. The difference is the plains are low elevation. The steppes are very similar looking, very flat, but they're at a high elevation. Okay, so what kinds of plants are going to grow in this kind of environment where even when you go down 3 inches down into the soil, it's already frozen? Well, you're going to have plants. The only type of plants that are going to grow in this type of environment are plants with very small roots. So guess what the steppes are covered with? They're covered with grass. Grass everywhere. Very few trees. Trees are very valuable. Wood is extremely valuable in this environment. You don't just chop down and burn wood automatically. You burn other stuff. But grass is, you'll find out in the video what they burn. Grass is extremely important. And because of that, because grass is everywhere in this environment, guess what there are tons and tons of? There are tons and tons of horses. And this is a very important part of the story of the Mongols. And that is that there are more horses than there are Mongols. Of course, horses eat grass. Okay? Now, the other story I would like to tell you is that they were experts in the use of the bow and arrow. Okay? So this is kind of interesting, isn't it? Because you have a bow and arrow, which is a two-handed operation, and you have guys on horseback. So let me say something about military. There's really three types. In most of ancient history, Middle Age history, there's really three types of people that go into battle. You have infantrymen, men who fight on foot. All right. You have cavalrymen, men who go into battle on horseback. Okay. And then you have archers, and these are not on horseback. These are guys on foot. And they usually don't have any other weapon. They just have bows and arrows. And if they run out of arrows, they usually retreat. The Mongols had no infantry because there were more horses than Mongols. So each Mongol soldier had multiple horses. They had no separate cavalry from archers. What I'm trying to imply to you is that the cavalry was the archers. Okay. Now, how did they do this? Well, they made a very famous invention. What do you put your feet in? When you get up on the saddle? What do you put your foot into to get up on the saddle when you get on a horse? You get in the stirrup, and then your feet sit in the stirrup. The Mongols are the inventors of the stirrup. And this is one of the great inventions of history. This allows a person to stand up and squeeze the horse with your legs and maintain control and operate a two-handed operation like a bow and arrow. The Mongols are some of the most ruthless people of all time. They ruled by using fear, violence, murder, vandalism, intimidation. Okay? Certainly they enslaved people. These are some of the most brutal people of all time. And they're brutal because they live in a brutal environment themselves, and they're struggling to survive, and so they'll do anything to survive. Okay? They're going to create the largest land empire, really the largest empire of history, the largest land empire still, very close to still being the largest land empire. The Soviet Union created one bigger in the 20th century, but the Mongol Empire is one of the greatest ones of all time. Okay? Now, as you might imagine, that the Mongols themselves had little time for culture. They were unable to be, look, I'm not going to give you a reading by a famous Mongol author. I'm not going to show you a sculpture by a famous Mongol sculptor. Okay? They didn't have time for that. They were nomads. So they didn't do those types of things. But what they would do is they would enslave artisans and craftsmen from the places they conquered. Okay? And they wanted these artisans and craftsmen to build things for them. And so what they would do is they would transfer these, usually men, they would transfer these guys back deep into Mongol territory, and they would force these guys to build things for them. And they usually force them to build weapons of war and items of war and things to help them win wars. Okay? So don't get too caught up on artisan. Somebody who was creative, somebody who could build things. Blacksmiths are a perfect example. Blacksmiths were prize captives of the Mongols, for example. Okay? So, look, there is no doubt that the Mongols were contradictory. Okay? They were a contradictory group of people. Okay? On one hand, and this is the reputation that they have, and it's well deserved, they were brutal. And this is what most people think of when they think of the Mongols, how brutal they were. Okay? They were willing, in many cases, to wipe everybody out. They would conquer a place, they would murder everyone in a conquered city, literally. Okay? They would wipe certain groups of people, certain civilizations, absolutely from the face of the earth. These people, certain groups of people, no, you no longer exist. Absolutely brutal in their use of fear tactics. Okay? Now I'm going to give you some examples. Here's a couple stories. Story number one. Mongols were going to conquer 2 cities in a row. So they would capture one city, and this is described, by the way, in the video that you watched. So they would capture one city, and they would keep a lot of the people alive, and they would march those people in front of them to the next city. So the next city, the guys on the wall ready to defend the wall. What do they see coming? They see a whole bunch of civilians from the other city. Maybe some of these civilians are their friends or neighbors, or their friends, or their even family members. Are they going to shoot down on these guys? No. And what the Mongols would do is they would, let's say the second city had a moat or a ditch around it. The Mongols would murder people from the first city one by one, and then they would fill up the moat with the dead bodies. Okay, or the ditch. Fill up the ditch with the dead bodies. Now they put, you get this ditch full enough with dead bodies. You put wood across it. Now the Mongols could get at the wall. Okay, so that's story number one. Story number two. Sometimes the Mongols use biological warfare. I think that the Middle Ages is well known for the Black Plague. So the Black Plague was something that if you caught it, you died pretty fast. You died of internal bleeding. your organs would just sort of decay very quickly, and you would die of internal bleeding, and your skin would turn. You didn't turn all black, but it was like bruises all over your body. So that's why they called it the Black Plague. Well, the Mongols would take their catapult machines, and they would launch dead bodies, dead from the plague, the Black Plague, over the walls of cities. And so now they would launch, if you will, the plague into a city. Well, the people inside the city know exactly what they're seeing, okay? And they are willing to make a run for it. They're willing to make a run for it now. And they open up the doors. Well, who's waiting at the doors of the city? Sure enough, the Mongols. I'll tell you one other story here about how brutal they were. And this is called the Attack on Japan story. Okay? And this had to do with 2 attempts by the Mongols to invade Japan. And one of the things they would do is they would capture Japanese women and not do with them what you may think of right off the top. One of the things they did is they captured Japanese women, and the way they kept them under control during the day is they would take their knives and they would make incisions through the palms of the hands of the Japanese women, through both hands. And then they would take a rope and they would pull the rope through the holes in the hands of these women. So you would have one long rope, and you'd have however many dozen women that aren't going to move because they got the rope pulled through the holes in the palms of their hand. They would take these women at the end of the fighting. They would take these women back out to their ships, and they would get up on deck, and they would tie one end of the rope to the bow, and they'd tie one end of the rope to the stern, and they would throw all the women overboard. Now they're hanging from this rope by the holes in their hands, and I don't know if you know much about the mesh of a hand. Eventually the body weight would cause the rope to rip through the skin of the hand, up through the fingers, and these women would drop into the water. And I'm sure you can imagine, with all that blood dripping around, what was waiting for them in the water. So these types of brutal things certainly are deserving. The Mongols are deserving of this reputation of their brutality. However, on the other hand, in a weird way, the Mongols, and especially their very main ruler, Genghis Khan, was interested in trade with the West. So I'm going to let the video do most of the talking on this. One of the things I would say is they reopened something called the Silk Road trade route that went from Europe to China. This route had always been sort of open. I can tell you a story of wealthy Romans back in the day of the Roman Empire, back in the days of Augustus. They were wearing silk, and they had no idea where it came from. It came from China, but no Roman knew exactly where it came from. But the Silk Road, this trade route, happened to exist. So for a long time it was splintered and scattered. Genghis Khan reopens the thing, and he starts trade between Europe and China. And basically what Genghis Khan understood, I think, more than anything else is they couldn't keep getting wealthy from taking. The Mongols were taker nomads, and Genghis Khan was smart enough to know and smart enough to figure out that they couldn't just keep taking forever. Okay? It's actually pretty brilliant to sort of think about it in that way. Genghis Khan said, we have to enrich ourselves some other way. I would like to say that the Mongols sort of invented paper money, okay? And then the last thing I'll sort of say is they also invented a system for sending messages in mail. Have you ever heard of the Pony Express in the United States? Well, that was sort of the 1800s. The Mongols were doing a Pony Express across much of Asia for way back in the 1200s, 12 and 1300s, okay? So here is a famous monument that was built for Genghis Khan in Mongolia. This was completed in 2008. It is a big, huge stainless steel. It's a big, huge stainless steel statue of him. It stands 130 feet tall, and it points east towards where we know he was born. Okay, and you can kind of see when you go to this site, like right there, you can see these two. I think it's a museum, and so there's like statues of Mongol soldiers all the way around the perimeter. There's not too many in this picture, but there's all these statues of Mongol soldiers that surround it. And so what you do is when you go to this museum, there's a stairway that goes up this backside through the rump of the horse. Okay, and what you do is you come out a set of doors, basically where Genghis Khan's crotch is, and then there's a stairway that goes up to the top of the head of the horse. And then this picture is taken, as you can see, there's the doorway in Genghis Khan's crotch. You can see that this picture was taken from the head of the horse, looking back at the. We don't really know what Genghis Khan looked like. He never sat for a portrait. This is a guess of what he looked like. Okay, but this is one of the famous images of him. Here's another one. This is more of an official. This is a sort of an official Mongolian. Appears to be some sort of ceremony. You can see you got Mongolian military guys dressed in modern garb, but they also are dressed in ancient garb as well. These are horse hairs. Okay, this is called a stuldi, if I remember this correctly. And Genghis Khan had one with white horsehair for peacetime and one with black horsehair for wartime. And he always displayed one or the other outside of his tent. And then there's a close-up look at a statue. Again, we don't know really what he looked like, if he was that heavy. But there you go. That's Genghis Khan, some images of him. Okay, and I'll let the video also speak for itself as well about how they were a contradiction. Okay? All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. The Mongols are very interesting. They're one of the very interesting groups of people of history because they're an oddity. They don't sort of follow, like I've always said, nomads lose against agriculturalists. These nomads, these Mongols were something else. Okay? All right, I hope you enjoyed that. We'll look forward to talking to you the next time. Thank you so much. Aloha.